TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut and welcome back to part 4 of Intro to Adobe Animate. Now in the last 3 episodes we have done the following. We've animated this stick man jumping, we've given him a head with a nested timeline within a symbol which makes his eyes blink. And we've animated a shadow, and doing it in all of so we have used frame by frame animation and we have used motion tweening. Okay, that is great. Now we're going to do a bit more frame by frame animation today, and we're going to do a little bit of effects. But the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to make something that he is kicking. It makes sense that he's kicking something if he's jumping up there to do so. So I'm just going to bung a new layer in on top of head, and we'll call this one ball. And I'll use this to explain some of the features of squash and stretch. So I'm just going to put in a bunch of blank keyframes here because I think I'm probably going to just animate this frame by drawing it each time rather than with a symbol or anything like that. And I'll show you why. So the first thing you want to do is actually go to the point of impact where you think he's going to actually kick this ball. And I think it's probably going to be this frame here. And the reason you want to do that is then because you can determine its trajectory and things like that. So if he's kicking the ball in this frame, for example, like so, and we won't use a disgusting grey, we'll perhaps use, if our sparks and things might be blue, let's use about a nice purple for the ball. Does that look all right? Green and purple? No, that looks crap. I think it looks crap because it's got too much saturation in it. That looks fine. There we go. So we've got our point of impact, which I'm actually going to make an impact. And then we can just pop our onion skin on so we can see our previous frames. Zoom right in and just jump in, get to work. Going to draw the ball squished down on his foot there. And then it's going to launch off. Bam. Pretty quickly because he's kicked it really quite hard. Now you can understand that at the moment it looks like I'm drawing a squishy shape, and that's because this is a concept called squash and stretch. Now obviously he's kicked this ball and I wanted to make it seem like it's a rather soft material, so I've had it form around his foot, but the ball hasn't actually stretched in physical space. When you draw these stretched frames, it just gives the illusion of powerful movement. If you were to stretch out an object like this, it gives the illusion, because of the way our eyes work, that the items moving very fast, if that makes sense. Bam, see, bam, just goes. In fact, that's probably one frame too many. We probably want that to be, based on the amount it's stretching, we want that to be even further away. Bam, bam. Yeah, nice one. Okay, so let's draw that preceding frame then. Now we know that here is the point of impact, so we're going to want perhaps the ball to be beginning to arc down. That's maybe a bit too long, but that's okay. We can just press Q to bring up the free transform tools, and we can squish it down a bit. Like so. Now this gives us our trajectory, basically. And what I'm going to just quickly do is, if I just zoom out and give myself a bit of a smaller brush, make this layer visible, I can see where this ball is going to have come from, if that makes sense. So based on that drawing, if someone were to have kicked it very hard, maybe it comes from a sort of general this way. Like that, maybe. Okay, so I'm just going to make that into a guide layer by hitting the little guide button up here, and I'm going to lock it. I'm going to use that as our guide for where we want the ball to come. Okay, so make sure we've got our brush back, which we do. Zoom in again, and I'm actually going to spin the canvas around to help facilitate drawing easier, because obviously this isn't a piece of paper that I can actually spin like you would in traditional animation. So I'm just going to hit H and tap the screen, and that gives me my pivot point. And then I'm just going to drag in a circle around the pivot point, and you can see that I can rotate completely. Even gives you a nice little angle at the angle of our screen that we're going to show. So draw this previous frame then. Now I understand that I'm working backwards here, but that's okay to do. That's not a problem. Just going to bring this all the way forward so we've got that guide still. Now at the top of the arc it might perceive to slow down slightly. So we'll factor that in. By squishing it a bit less. Now I am working a bit more sloppily than I would usually. That's just because I'm doing this for the sake of illustration. I don't want to spend too long faffing around with with needless detail. Obviously, for your animation, because you want it to be a work of art, you'll take all the time in the world because you can pause me and rewind me, etc. Okay, so let's just zoom out, check what our movement looks like there. Bit sloppy, perhaps. Bam. Yeah, see, that looks like it shrinks because I've taken the squash and stretch way too far. For example, at that point of impact, back to the ball is tiny. So there's two ways we can fix this. We can either go through and make all the squash and stretch smaller, or we can make the ball bigger. I think I'm going to make the ball bigger. Bam. Boom. Bloop. Make the ball bigger here because there's less frames to adjust. And then these need to be just a touch bigger if that's the case. And so does that one. There we go. Again, this is probably too many frames. Moves a bit slow. That one looks weird too. Probably the right amount of frames for the sake of illustration. So we'll just make sure that we don't make our streak sort of like too fat. I think because I've done a very rough guideline, I'm kind of trying to fill that up subconsciously, which isn't actually the case of what would necessarily happen. Okay, that'll do then. Show that frame. Bam, nice one. Cool, we can delete our guide layer. I'm roughly happy with that. Perfect, we've got the thing that it's kicking. So now let's do some fun stuff. Boom, like so. Let's do some cool effects, okay? Now, we know that each of these is going to be a frame-by-frame job. There's probably not going to be much motion tweening. So I'm just going to hold Alt and drag these frames around to duplicate them because I'm going to need a lot of keyframes for this section. Now, that probably gives me enough. Just going to delete that camera. Animate, the new version of Animate has an annoying habit of building a camera when you don't need one. We will get into cameras in later episodes. Perhaps I'll make it a separate series because that is a bit more intermediate. So I'm just going to build a few more layers and we'll call these effects 3 and effects 4. Okay, great. So I've decided that I want blue for some of these effects that are coming off him. So I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to go and find a nice blue. Maybe something like this turquoisey color. That looks nice and powery, if that makes sense. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so let's go back to our first frame here. Now, if he's using this power to sort of launch himself in the air, it's going to have to build up for a few frames, which is called anticipation. Then it's going to erupt as he blasts off. So let's have a think about this. You probably start to see something form around here, this frame. So we'll have just a few ripples of power come off him, okay? Now I'm just going to shrink my brush down. Maybe not that small. Yeah, that'll do. Just so I've got something to work with. And we're going to start to build up just what you might think this power would look like. Now for me, if he's launching, it's going to go in a nice circle that explodes out around his feet and it's going to trail behind him. So we'll do it all one at a time. Okay, so maybe something like so. Don't worry too much about the little details because we'll do those on a separate layer a bit later. Now this one will have some power rippling off like this, but we'll also have a nice big sort of floor circle of power rippling like so. And the first thing we're going to want to do is drag all this below, above the shadow and below the body and head. Perfect. Okay, so here is where we need some fallout of this. So we'll just bring it out a bit further. Remembering, of course, that this floor is technically extending towards us. In terms of our point of view. So keeping that in mind when you're drawing the circle in terms of the angles that you draw. etc. Sorry, that was my computer catching up with me there. And we'll just saw some ripples of power that begin to separate in these sort of naturally forming thick chunks that we had before. Put a few ripples in because that always looks nice. Now again, I am rushing this slightly because I don't want these tutorials to just be hours and hours of me drawing the same thing over and over again. Okay, so those ripples of power erupting off a bit further, getting smaller as they dissipate. And then the thickness of this ripple is beginning to thin out and reduce, like so. These ones then we can just do some nice quick little zaps. And here we'll do the same thing as the power has begun to dissipate. Okay. Now, you may be thinking, what about the bits trailing from his legs, etc.? Good question. We'll do those now. So as you can see, there's no need to try and do all the details at once, if that makes sense. It's actually better to go back and do them a separate time because that way you don't get bogged down in trying to remember all these tiny different paths of animation and things like that. You can go back, don't even need a new layer. You can do it all on the same layer, look. Here you go. So there, he's on the floor. We'll do some anticipation lines. And on the same layer, we'll just have these really cool looking streak things come out off of his feet. Okay. Same things here. So we'll have a few of these dissipate off, but we will have as if the power is literally coming out from his foot as he launches, which we will then have dissipate off, have these shorten and move up, and then have the last few dregs of power down there. And then these ones will just sort of peter out all by themselves. Just thinking about the angle from which he launched, which ways the velocity has come from, things like that. Okay, now, sorry, I had a bit of an itch there. That should probably do for the launch. Let's have a look. Bam, looks all right. Okay. Now we'll come back and adjust some of those details later. But the next thing we want to do is the anticipation of the kick. So you probably want some power coming off of his leg as he begins to wind up for that. So we'll just quickly do the anticipation frames. Some little bits of power there. Then it needs a bit more of a build up. Now people's minds will fill in the blanks. I'll promise that for you now. So don't worry too much if there seems to be large differences in your frames. Obviously, if he's moving faster, there will be more larger gaps. But as you can see from there, from this frame to this frame, it seems like a huge jump. But when you're watching this in real time, it should look all right. Not too bad, not too bad. Okay, so we just pop those in. A bit of a power kick there. Again, I am brushing this ever so slightly. I'm not sure how tolerant my audience is of just watching me draw frame after frame. If you decide you like it, great. Maybe I'll keep this sort of stuff in, take a bit more time over it in the future. So here I'm thinking I might want the same thing, but with some more offshoots of power, because he's sort of kicked here, not just launched himself off. So we want some sort of, some kind of damaging thing. But I'm thinking I will also try the ripple here as well. Bam. In a nice, neat kind of thing. So it comes off like this. Oops. Thinking that the power is going to reel back more than it is forwards. So perhaps a thicker point of impact coming off to a thinner point of impact coming off to a thicker retaliation frame. Now I am going to come back and do all those offshoots, don't worry. I'm just getting these looking okay. And here we go into the animators mumble as I start concentrating on the lines. Now animation, this kind of style of animation is a long process. However, you do get a level of detail and control that you don't get when motion tweening. As you can see, what you draw is what you get. So if you make a mistake, that will show. On the flip side of that, if you draw something pretty good, that will show as well. And it's all you. The computer hasn't handled any of it. So there is that really nice finite level of control that you do get back when you're doing frame by frame animation. Okay, so we want some nice little I say nice, this might look terrible. Some nice little ripples of detail coming off of here. Again, I'm rushing. Do let me know if you don't mind me drawing this stuff and watching me draw it. But I have a feeling that's not what you're here for. You're here to learn the basics of Adobe Animate. So that's what I'm trying to do. So essentially, we're working here on 2s. That means 2 frames per image. That means you don't end up drawing so much that you're wasting your efforts. But you can slip down to 1s for the more detailed segments of your animation. There's no, just because you started working on 2s doesn't mean you can't change later on down the line. In fact, for my sort of more artsy-fartsy animations I used to do, I even worked on 3s because I like the staggering sort of stop motion almost feel that it gave to it. So really there are guidelines less than rules. Obviously classic animators will tell you all the rules to their eyes turn blue, teeth turn blue, whatever the phrase is, lips turn blue. But they are guidelines. You don't have to follow them. Bam, bam. There we go. Bam, bam. Nice one. I think then that'll do for today. And we'll get on to adding some visual effects and some additional layers to this effect and the landing thing in the next episode. So thank you very much for watching. Stick around for more work with symbols and motion graphics and things like that next time in what might be the finale of Intro to Animate CC. Wow, what a journey. I'll see you then.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.